Hello everyone, my name is Bastian and today we talk about calibrated peer reviews and how we used it in our undergraduate safety requirements engineering course. I must say, requirements engineering is one of the most fun topics in software engineering, for me at least. However, it's also very theoretical and consists of many different topics, all of which are very theoretical and very hard to for students to wrap their heads around it. There are very few example specifications that exist, and those that do exist are so large that they are barely applicable in a higher education type context where you only have a couple of weeks to worry about them. Examples are also often very academic. We all remember the bank teller machine or the library system, right? So in other words, students need not only theoretical instruction, but practice to get really good at requirements engineering. We had a pretty good example of how this worked, and then the pandemic hit. During the pandemic, students kept their cameras off and the microphones turned down, and we basically kept teaching in front of this anonymous wall of icons sitting there on Zoom. And before, we noticed how students were actively engaging with each other, presenting solutions and requirements engineering to each other in the classroom. During and after the pandemic, we quickly noticed that students dropped in motivation and enthusiasm, and not just for requirements engineering, but let's say for university at large. There was a higher degree of withdrawing and lack of engagement, Zoom fatigue, and students retained the theoretical concepts even worse than they did before. And finally, we noticed that many students stopped reflecting about the adequacy of their solutions. They just did the assignment sheets and then were done or considered themselves done, which is really sad. Because before we had this collaborative atmosphere where we could talk to students about different kind of alternative solutions and everyone felt encouraged to show them. And now students were reluctant to show their own solutions for an assignment. And there was really very little discussion among different alternatives. So we were wondering how to combat that. Then we heard about calibrated peer reviews. Calibrated peer reviews is not our invention. It's been invented before, and it was initially invented as a tool, like a web-based tool to help creative writing instruction. It's a formative peer assessment technique, however. The principles of this technique is in theory applicable to any kind of assessment procedure. It can be even done without a tool. It basically consists of the following parts. Not only are students going to make the assignment sheet, they're also being presented with hopefully the anonymous solution of other students along with what we call calibrated examples. And then based on these solutions and those calibrated examples are supposed to evaluate each other. This has several benefits that are particularly useful for requirements engineering, in my opinion. First of all, it introduces or it reintroduces this learning by multiple examples type approach that we were really missing in remote instruction, right? During calibrated peer reviews, students are suddenly forced to look at each other's alternatives and then, while giving each other feedback, articulate the advantages and disadvantages. And by being exposed to not only the calibrated examples, but other students' solutions, they not only get to look at exactly one solution, they get to look at many different ways of solving the same assignment sheet. So this, in our opinion, reintroduces some of the collaborative atmosphere that was lost during remote instruction. So how did we do this in our course? I don't want to spend too much time talking about the requirements engineering course. We've discussed this in detail, and if you're interested in reading about it, here's a citation for the paper that we've discussed here at this conference before. But just to summarize, the course is 55 minutes for 3 times a week over the course of a 15-week semester. Usually has around 16 students in it, but up to 30 are allowed to enroll, and has roughly these four different assessment types. It has a midterm and a final exam assessed by the instructor, as well as a project milestone that, like I said before, we talked about at length, and it has 6 assignment sheets. Now, the assignment sheets roughly converge with the course topics, and it's on failed RE projects, eliciting requirements from interviews and then several modeling exercises. And the idea here is that the assignment sheets complement the project in a think, pair, share type instruction process. First, students get exposed to the topic in theory in class. Then we pair them up and they're supposed to finish their assignment sheets. And then afterwards, they share their results to the entire class. Except the sharing to the entire class, we replace this with calibrated peer reviews. And then the idea is, of course, that based on the feedback and based on the experience they made, they're supposed to apply this in a non-trivial semester-dominating project. So like I said, the share part we replaced with calibrated peer reviews, and this is how we've done it. Here in this activity diagram in the upper left corner, we'll see how we've done each assignment sheet. The gray parts here are the parts that are specific to calibrated peer review. Well, first we made the assignment sheets and we assigned them to the students, and then students had roughly 10 days or so to complete the solution. We collected the anonymized solutions, so making sure that there are no identifying markers on the solutions themselves. Basically, we asked pairs of students to come up with a unique to them identifier, like shown in the table down here. And then we assigned review teams, making sure that each team roughly reviews the same amount of other people's solutions like everyone else does. And then each team was giving their individual review package. The review package consists of the following things. The sample solutions I just talked about, which contains one low quality example for the solution, one medium quality example, and one high quality example, as well as the instructor's ideal solution. Now, this is not the ideal solution. There could be many different ways to correctly solve this, but we provided them with one that was different from the 3 solutions that they've already seen. We also gave the students the grading rubric as well as a grading template where to pencil in the feedback for other teams. And then we collected the feedback and calculated up the points like shown down here. Afterwards, students had about 7 days to complete the review. And after we collected the non-anonymous feedback, we quality checked the solutions, making sure that students actually provided feedback and didn't just leave the feedback field blank. Make sure that there was no profanity in the feedback and things like that. And then, of course, we distributed the feedback to everyone. So, how did the students do? I brought with me here a line graph of the students' average scores on all 6 assignment sheets, as well as the average mean score in 2020, 21, and comparison 2019 before the pandemic. And as we can see, during the semester, the students did comparatively well to all in 2021 as the previous years. However, when we look at the final here, we notice that in 2021, students were rating each other about 9% points better on average than in 2020. And they were rating each other about 16% points better than in 2019. It is important to note that the only difference between these 3 years is that in 2021, it was the students who gave each other the grades. The grading rubric and the grading template was the same, however, among all 3 years. But in 2019 and 20, it was the instructor who provided the grades. So we can see that we have between 10 and 16% of grade percent points of grade inflation here. As we will see later, this is actually consistent with a paper that came out last year at ICSI by Anish et al., who found that peer assessment leads to about 10 to 15% in grade inflation in a software engineering class with 600 plus students. And we see the same results here. Of course, when we check when we compute the t-test over here, we find that 2021 was significantly better. The average grades were significantly better in 2021 compared to both previous years, but there was no significant difference between 2019 and 2020. Now, of course, you're saying, Bastian, that's all great, so they give each other higher grades. Did they learn more, though? And the answer is, I think they do. When we look at the exams over here, we measured how much students actually retained as assessed by the final and midterm exams. Now, these exams were the same across all 3 years. The grading rubric was the same, and the grading template was the same for all 3 years. And it was the same instructor who graded all exams. And even here, we can see a much higher average grade in the exams compared to the previous 2 years. These results are significant between 2021, where students were significantly better than 2019. Not significant for 2020, though, even though, well, we got mighty close here, but it's still not significant. Right? So this was pretty encouraging. The question, of course, now is, well, how did students like it? And to our delight, we saw that on syllabus day, most students groaned and rolled their eyes quite loudly at yet another thing to do. But it took precisely one assignment sheet for them to say, oh, wow, this is so useful. It gave me a lot of confidence in my own solution and being able to do it just as good or even better next time, just by looking at other alternative solutions. One concern was outlier grades, which occasionally happened. Outlier grades happens when one team evaluates one other team outrageously good or outrageously poor or anything like that. This occasionally happened here and there. In all but one case, it was trivially resolved by looking at the specific feedback that the students gave each other, which provided a clear rationale. In one case, there was a student group that was upset with the grade they got from one other student group, in which case we resolved the conflict among the reviewers and the receiving student group fairly easily. And we already mentioned the positively inflated grades. Students give each other higher grades on average. I suppose that's a fact of nature, but we are confident that students actually learn quite a bit more. One concern that I personally had was, in fact, lack of effort or profanity in the feedback that students give each other. And there was none of that. It didn't happen. It did not happen. It was just a non-issue. Not a single student gave an inappropriate review of any other person. We still took a lot of time to check this, and one hope that I also personally had that, well, maybe calibrated peer reviews cuts down on your grading time. Well, it did not. In fact, it took a lot longer for every single assignment sheet than before. Just the quality check alone took 90 minutes, just not to find any profanity. So that was encouraging. At the same time, it just took a lot longer. I should say that even though CPR used to be like it was invented as a tool, this was a completely manual process in this course. We did not have any tool support. But looking how long this takes definitely demands tool support in the future. Nevertheless, given how significant and massively positively this impacted student retention, I will never teach requirements engineering and assignment sheets without calibrated peer reviews ever again. And I think you should do the same if you can. So in summary, we introduced calibrated peer reviews to combat lack of exposure to other students' alternative solutions in requirements engineering. We found great inflation, but also a significant higher degree of retention as measured through exams. And well, all the fears that we had about letting students evaluate themselves were essentially turned out to be non-issues. Took a lot of time though, so in the future we'll definitely be looking for tool support. And if you know about a tool, please do let us know. Anyways, thank you very much for your attention, and talk to you soon.